All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Limitless MD. I'm your host, Vikram Raya, and today we're going to talk about balance. We're going to talk about how to balance everything, and really, it's really not balance, but priorities. And this is how you can get everything done: your family, your health, your business, your mindset, and more. So let's do this.
What if you could reclaim hours of free time each week, create legacy building wealth, and devote more energy to your passion projects without giving up on your career as a life-saving MD? Dr. Vikram Raya is a functional cardiologist, high-performance coach, and real estate expert, is here to give you the tools, strategies, and solutions you need to transform your life, unlock your limitless potential, and achieve greatness, all while freeing up your precious time. Welcome to Limitless MD. Let's dive in.
So often people ask me, hey, Vikram, you're a cardiologist, you're an investor, you're a CEO, you're a husband, father, athlete, coach, how do you do it all, right? And here's the honest truth. I don't balance everything. I just prioritize the key things in my life, and everything else I have to either delay, delegate, delete, etc. So that is the truth. You have to just choose your mighty five, if you will, right? And I've talked about this concept before. The mighty five are really just God's given you a hand with five fingers. There's probably only five main things you can do at any one time. Usually for me, that's my family. Specifically, it's actually my wife, my kids, my health, and at this point, my two main businesses, which is coaching and real estate. So anything that's not on those big five is probably a secondary goal, secondary wish, secondary task, and it probably doesn't get prioritized as much. That's one way to think about it. The other thing is, if everything in your life is a 10 out of 10 importance, then honestly, I would predict that you're probably not moving the needle in anything, because your life energy is being diffusely spread out over all those topics. One of the cool things that I've come up with based on all the readings I've done is, I've found 8 main categories of life that I think are important. I call them the 8 forms of wealth. We've created a whole mastermind based on that called the Infinite Mastermind. I think I've hinted at it in my book. And it's an evolution from my initial concept of the 5 freedoms, right? 5 freedoms were, time freedom, financial freedom, mindset freedom, vitality freedom, and geographic freedom. And though those were important, I felt that they were incomplete. And over the years, I really wanted to add other freedoms, and not more than just freedoms, or I would say they're forms of wealth, right? And so now it's really this mindset wealth, or the inner mindset of wealth. And I make that a priority. I really do. Like my mindset is very important. It allows me to take on a lot of things, a lot of projects, a lot of goals, but it doesn't overwhelm me, right? And we'll talk about why that is. The second is vitality. If you don't have vitality wealth, then you don't have the energy to live that fullest life and take on a lot of the things that you want to do. The next is really relationship wealth. It's really having, your family, your friends, your spouse, your partner, and then your work colleagues, and then you just draw a circle round and around, and as each circle radiates from the center, that circle of influence of relationships is important. And then obviously you want career wealth, right? This is you doing very successful in whatever primary career you've chosen to do, and if that changes over time, so be it, but that career is really important. And then you move on to economic wealth, where, hey, all the money from my job, my investments, just the way I essentially you become an asset manager. You manage all the assets you've been given, your time, your income, your land, other assets that you do, and then you grow your asset base, and that allows you to create true economic wealth. And then we call those the 4 foundational wealths, and then you move on to sort of what I call genius wealth. This is surrounded by smart, intellectual, stimulating people who are positive, entrepreneurial, ambitious, collaborative, right? Those are the kind of people you want to be around. You want to have adventure, right? Climbing mountains, scuba diving, doing a Spartan race, things like that stimulate you. And whether it's a art or a passion project or a trip or a journey, that's all great. Finally, you really layer on really what we call impact wealth. And this is your philanthropy, your charity, your spirituality. You're really trying to have an impact on the world. You're trying to make it a better place. You're trying to leave a legacy in a positive way that impacts those even after you're gone. And so those are sort of my guiding stars. And the goal is, hey, how do I go towards that, away from stress, overwhelm, limited mindset, scarcity mindset and do these things. And I'll give you an example. This year I climbed Mount Rainier, and it required a lot of discipline, it required planning, it required coordination with, my family, my teams, my companies, my kids, my wife, and I was able to make it happen. But I made it a priority. I scheduled a year ahead of time, and so I was able to coordinate and block it into my calendar, right? But it was life-defining moment of achieving that peak. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had to overcome a lot of adversity to get to the top of that mountain. And it was a spiritual journey. It was a physical journey. It was an adventure journey, but it was also just a metaphor for my life. I'm like, what's the next mountain I want to climb in life, right? And then, another example of family or relationship wealth is really, pouring into my kids, whether they're physical activities or basketball. They're starting some entrepreneurship things. One of them is interested in a mobile detailing business. The other one started a vending machine business. And so it's really cool to see them thrive and be unique individual human beings and learning to figure out things on their own. And then you're helping and guiding them. And then obviously, focused on growing, some of the companies I'm part of and the coaching. Like, we've really refined our coaching strategies. We've hired other coaches. We've formalized our curriculum. We've, perfected our challenges, and we're doing all these things and putting systems in place. And it's great. I mean, honestly, entrepreneurship is the number one self-development tool on the planet. So if you ever want to get really good at self-development, become an entrepreneur. It takes you through the ups and downs, the valleys, the peaks, the stress, the joy, being resourceful. It's great. So this is sort of my philosophy, and so some examples of how I've applied it. Now the question is really, how do I implement it on a day-to-day basis? So what I do is really, honestly, once a week, once every couple of weeks, I do sort of a brain dump, a data dump of everything I need to do, and I put it into categories. And so I call this my life box. And really, I create a life box for every category of life. So what I mean is, like, hey, if I have a company, that has a box. If I have the kids, that's a box. If I have I'm writing a book, for example, that would be a box. And so I have all these boxes, and you may have 12, 16, 20, 25 boxes, but think about it. And it should all be on one piece of paper so you can quickly, with one glance, see everything. And the way to think about this is, take a piece of paper, fold it in half again, fold in half once, that's 2, fold in half again, that's 4, fold in half again, that's 12. I think folding half again, that's 16, I believe. So anyway, you have 16 boxes. That should be more than enough for most people. And in there, just put down like all the to-dos, all the things that are on your mind, right? And you just release that from your brain and put it on paper. And you can do this obviously on a spreadsheet or Google Docs. And then from there, that's everything that needs to be done. But everything doesn't need to be done, right? These are just random thoughts that your brain thinks are concerning, and they've put them alerted to your forefront of your brain. And now they're cycling and causing stress. And so the key really is, of those things, probably only 20% of those things need to be done and would move the needle forward in your life. And you can take a highlighter and highlight those things, transfer to a planner or a weekly productivity system. I use something called the Productivity Planner by Intelligent Change, and I use the quarterly edition because every 90 days, I want to make sure I'm making meaningful progress toward my goals in the different categories. And so I take those and I cherry pick the ones I want to tackle that week, and then the following week and the following week. And how do I know which 10 to 15 goals I want to tackle that week? It's based on the concept of rocks, right? These are 90-day goals that are meaningful based on my categories of life, right? Remember, I mentioned my 5 categories of life. So if I had my 5 categories of life, maybe those were one goal for each category. That could be the way to do it. Or, hey, you have your maybe 3 professional goals and 2 personal goals, right? There's multiple ways to skin that cat. So I've highlighted everything in my life box, transferred the top 15 for that week based on my 90-day goals into my planner. And then every day I'm tackling one of these or 2 of these a day on top of my normal daily routines. And I'm checking back at the end of the day, and then at the end of the week, I look back and see how I've done. I give myself feedback. In my book, Perfect Week Formula for Doctors, on Sundays, we have this planning strategy where every Sunday you sit down for 35 minutes to 45 minutes to even an hour, and you just review your week. You schedule your next week, and it's one of the most beautiful and stress relieving and purposeful activities you can do. And the top 1% do it, the bottom 99% don't, right? But if you do this, it is life changer, game changer. As an example, my son is finished up middle school. He's in high school now. He's in ninth grade. And the amount of work from eighth grade to ninth grade is either easily 2 times to 3 times the amount of work. And, initially he was overwhelmed the first month and had to sit down with him. We had to teach him time management and calendaring and scheduling and being an advocate to your teachers and all these kind of things. And so now he's picked it up and now he does these kind of things. And so it's good for students, it's good for doctors, it's good for entrepreneurs, but this is what I found to be helpful for myself, and hopefully it will be helpful for you. And that is sort of the strategy. The next thing I like to do is really buy back, your time, right? How do you buy back your time? And this is something I learned from Dan Martell with his book with the same title. And people say, hey, how do you do so much? And the answer is really, I don't, right? My systems do and my teams do. So what I do is at the beginning of things, I try to figure out, what are the tasks that I'm really good at that I need to do? And then who can I get to do some of these other tasks? Who can I delegate? What can I delay? What can I, use AI for? And so, me hiring an executive assistant about 4 years ago was one of the best moves I ever made. It literally doubled my productivity. A lot of times I waste, scheduling meetings, booking flights, travel arrangements, all that stuff is now off my plate. And, people say, hey, I can't afford an executive assistant. Maybe it costs you 50, 60, 70K. Fine. You can start with just someone from the Philippines, a virtual assistant that is really trained at, working with executives. And, for $1,000 a month, maybe you can get someone really good to do a lot of these things and take them off your plate, right? If you're the first line of defense for communications with the outside world, that's a problem, right? Especially if you have big goals and dreams. So you want to have a buffer between you and the outside world. And then, the other thing is as you start building companies and teams, or even within your own organization, you're an entrepreneur, right? Helping someone else build their company. You want to start having, people who you can delegate to or people who report to you, because at some point you learn enough, you know enough, and you can, delegate this out. And other thing you can create is SOPs or processes or workflows or playbooks, they call them. So these are the things. And then whatever you can automate, like your finances, your bill pay, a lot of things you can automate. You can make things simple, like groceries can be all done online. You can have someone come in once a week and do all the laundry, someone do the cleaning. These are the kind of things. And honestly, remember this, your time is the most valuable asset you have. And most times it's non-renewable. And the problem is we spend our valuable time doing $20 an hour tasks, but we have $1 million vision. And so that's the disconnect, right? You're trying to save, 3 figures, 4 figures, 5 figures when you want to make 7 or 8 figures. That's the arbitrage you need to do. And the final thing really is, recovery and environment. You want to create an environment that's conducive to success, clean, organized environment. You want to have wellness and vitality built in. Maybe you have a home gym or sauna, cold plunge, exercise. You have a routine, you have rituals. You have maybe a vision board where your goals are seen by yourself and others. You're around coaches or mentors. You're into masterminds. And the key really is I don't rely on motivation. I design my environment in a way where success is inevitable, right? It goes from possible to probable to inevitable. So I think that's the key. I'll answer a couple of quick questions that I've gotten, and then I'll want to wrap up this episode here. So how do you travel with family and still run a business? The key really is I try to get everything done before I leave for my trip, and I try to predict what are the challenges they will have without me. And if there's challenges that happen on that trip, on the next trip, I already create SOPs, playbooks, or strategies to what they can do on their own without me. So then, I can only have a problem once. After that, it becomes a system or a playbook. And then the other thing is, I create a threshold. If it's this kind of problem, please let me know. Otherwise, handle it, or we can handle it together when I come back. How do you stay in shape with a hectic schedule? Exercise is not a option. It's a non-negotiable. And you need to start developing these non-negotiables. And this is what distinguishes you from the general masses, right? If you have the same standards as most of the people around you, there's no way you can be an exception because you're not exceptional. You have to be exceptional. So you have to keep a higher standards than your friends, your colleagues, your And it's lonely sometimes, but that's what's needed, right? And I noticed that like I've lowered my standards, on my food. I think earlier in the year, and people were like, "Oh my God, you're eating that? What's going on? Oh, this is not the Vikram I know." And they were holding me back to my high standard. I was like, "Okay, what am I doing? I need to get back to eating at a clean level, right?" And so I recommitted to myself, right? So, how do you stay present with your kids? I think the phone is the key. Like putting away your phones, asking them good questions. Don't ask them yes or no questions. Ask them interesting questions. Plan outings with them where it's just one kid at a time. Uh, find out what's exciting, interesting for them, and talk about that. I think that's the key. How do you avoid burnout? You have to take weekends off sometimes. You have to go do things that fill your cup up. You have to meditate. You have to do things that stimulate passion. Sometimes you just need to walk away from things and let things chill out for a little bit, and then when you come back, you're going to be ready to handle them. So you want to get to the point where you don't even sense burnout, because that may be too late. And another thing is you have to prioritize yourself. The whole oxygen mask on yourself theory is true. A lot of times we prioritize everyone else and we have resentment, regret, all that kind of thing. There's no need, right? If you just do extreme self-care for yourself, you will have so much to fill other people's cups. So with all that said, you don't need to balance everything, guys. You need to really architect a life where things are important by design. If you want more freedom, start with one win in each of those, 8 wealths every week. And you just have to declare what you want in your life and then start moving toward it. Micro wins, micro progress. Consistency is the key. And if you need anything, we're always here for you at Limitless MD. So with that, guys, I wish you well. And until next time, be phenomenal.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Limitless MD. If you found value from this episode, I encourage you to share this episode with a friend and let me know by leaving a review. For more information, make sure you check out the links in the show notes below or simply visit vikramraya.com. Until next time, be phenomenal.